Welcome back. Well, there's been some relief at the tills for local consumers as annual inflation cooled to 5.5% in November from 5.9% in October. Now, the cooling in prices was expected by many economists on the back of the decline in fuel prices in that month. But food prices have continued to be a cause for concern, with that category being the largest contributor to today's print. Joining me now to delve deeper into this print is PwC economist Christie Viljoen. Christie, thank you for your time and a good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
All right, lower but still high, Christie?
Yes, I mean, it's as often a combination of good news and bad news. So the good news is inflation is down from last month, down from 5.9 to 5.5, but it's still elevated when we think of what the Reserve Bank's target range is, between 3 and 6%.
What is interesting also is the difference between a core and headline inflation right now, with a core inflation actually falling well within that target range. What do we make of that, Christie?
So the core inflation is a number the Reserve Bank likes to look at because it strips out some of the more volatile numbers like food inflation and fuel, a few other items. And it's a less volatile trend. And when that goes towards the middle of the range of the Reserve Bank's target, it is in itself good news. Obviously, the headline number is the most important, but that core number is good news for us. So when you see a lower core number, then you also often see a lower, let's call it second and third round effect. So the impact of inflation on people they're needing to adjust their prices even further. So it's good news, certainly. We are also seeing at the same time that something like fuel prices, which is part of that headline number, but not part of the core number, it's also looking very good. After last month's fuel price declines, the fuel price inflation is very, very limited. It's about 1.5%. So a little bit of good news there as well.
Let's talk about food price inflation now, Christie. For me, this is a huge red flag. We are pointing this to the poultry industry, what we're seeing there with the avian flu. But I'm keen to find out just how much of the food price number is poultry products.
Well, we do know that food price inflation is the one that often goes very high. And in a South African context, with our social environment, then food prices is a very sensitive topic, given how many people live hand to mouth. And food inflation has come down. It was previously in double digits. We're back in single digits now, which is good news. And as you said, one of the points that is actually keeping us from actually seeing even slower inflation on the food front is with the eggs and the poultry prices. We know eggs and poultry very much staple foods in the country. It's amongst the highest spending points on food, along with maize and rice, for example. So for the average South African, this situation is of concern. We do know that it's probably a bit of a better outlook for 2024, but at the same time, we know that prices on poultry and eggs are not going to come down significantly anytime soon, as the industry is still recovering. So heading into 2024, as inflation is slowly coming down, that's going to be sort of one of the brakes on the speed at which inflation could be coming down.
Are we possibly seeing here also, Christie, some opportunistic price increases by retailers?
Well, that's the kind of analysis that I guess the Competition Commission often looks at. And it's unfortunately something that you can only really look backwards over time, to be very honest. We know that for certain, from the producer side, from the supply side, there is significant price pressures because of the amount of animals in the poultry value chain that we don't have now compared to, let's say, 12 months ago. So whether there's price gouging or opportunistic pricing, you will see that in every country when there is a shortage. You will see it in every country when there's disruption to supply chains. Locally, it is obviously a point of concern when it comes to the welfare of South Africans, especially on the lower side of the income value chain. So it is something that probably needs to be looked at and just so we need to be pragmatic about that, to be honest.
Let's also talk about fruit products. They recorded an annual increase of 11.5% in November, the highest increase we've seen since December of 2020. I would say it was seasonal, but we didn't see that in 2021 or 2022, Christie. Not sure what to make of that reality as well.
So the tricky bit with these calculations, there are obviously many different factors being taken into account. So we can easily say that global commodity prices are lower now than they were a year ago. That's fine. But at the same time, the rand is weaker than it was a year ago. So there's a balance between those factors. We also know that despite fuel prices having come down in the past 2 months, on average they increase every year. Also a combination of commodity and fuel prices. So that means that transporting goods like food from the farm to the factory to the retail outlet, all of those costs actually add up, to the general trend in inflation. So we'd ideally love to see lower food price inflation, yes. And it's easy for us to point at maybe the lack of a specific shock to the value chain, maybe on the agriculture side or the transport side. But at this point, food inflation is still quite elevated. And I think heading into 2024, a key component will be the transport aspect. It's a combination of the fuel price, but also the delays that we are seeing in the import of goods coming in through our harbors and the delays in rail service, for example. That is extending the time that it takes for products to come in. And in the case of food, for example, you've got the risk of spoilage. So the product might not even arrive on time in a way that can be sold. So all of those things keep pressures high on costs. So we should not be surprised, I guess, that food inflation is still quite elevated at this point.
I think what's a bit of a trick for South Africa and our inflation print, Christie, and I'm keen to get your thoughts on this one, is really balancing idiosyncratic issues as well as exogenous issues here. And I think, we are sitting on a risky environment in terms of both.
That's correct. So all of our prices are determined by local and international factors. The international factors we have no control over. If we look ahead at next year, as I mentioned, one of the key factors is the fuel price. There we're thinking it comes from the oil price, which could be affected by developments in the Middle East, without digging into those in any details. On the local front, combination of transport challenges, electricity, a few other local elements that are all of our own making. I'm not going to say within our control, because if they were completely in our control, we could solve them quite easily. But there are local factors that we as a country have that are quite unique. We know there are efforts happening to improve the load shedding situation for next year, improve supply of services in the port, the harbor systems, railway, etc. But those things take time. It's unlikely that even with the positive outlook on these factors that we will see an immediate impact. So it is, like I said, a combination of these local and international factors that we can't really solve very quickly. And if you think of a food producer, a company that makes food for South Africans to buy, it's largely out of their control. They need to take these costs into account when they produce the food. And that is unfortunately how producer price inflation works.
Okay, so I'd like to thank you for your time today and also this very valuable analysis on that CPI print. That was economist at PwC, Christie Viljoen.